Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be going over list building in Starcraft the miniatures game, so maybe a slightly less exciting video to watch, but a really important one if you're looking to play the game just past the demos. Today we'll be using a site called Ingalls Industries. You can see it up here in the bar. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, apologies if I'm not. It's a community list builder that I came across on the Archon Studios Discord, and I quite like it. Shout out to, again, I'm probably going to mispronounce your screen name, but Jingles, I don't know how you pronounce that, G Ingalls. Shout out to them for this one. It's really nice, and they are still updating it as the beta goes on. There are other community list builders out there. I have seen a couple other ones. I have seen a few that are also just Google Sheets or Excel sheets, so you can have those on your phone or on your desktop if you want those as well. And of course, Archon Studios is going to have an official one when it comes out. I'm not going to tell you which one you should use or which one you should prefer. This is the one I'm going to use today. If you'd rather use the official one, if you have access to it, great. If you'd rather use a different builder, or if you just want to write it out pen and paper, old school style, that is all fine. Today is not about that choice, but rather this is about what they're used for, which is making lists to play StarCraft. So we're going to talk about the process of list building, and we're going to do this demo with a Protoss list. For this site, at least, you're just going to click this Create New Army button, and it's going to bring you to a new army builder. Now, the first thing you're going to do every time you play StarCraft is figure out what level you're going to be playing at. The two kind of standardized modes that they have is skirmish mode and standard engagement. Skirmish mode is 1,000 points, standard engagement is 2,000 points. If you are familiar with games like Warhammer, for instance, 2,000 points is your general matched play level, while skirmish mode is going to be more of like quick pickup games, faster games, demo games, stuff like that. I'm sure the medal will evolve between the two, and people will prefer the 1,000 point list simply because it is a smaller game mode, and sometimes you have less space to play in or less time to play in. So both game modes work just fine. We're going to be doing a list building here for 2,000 points just to show off how it works. You will see that you can put in your game points up here. You can customize this and put in like 2050, stuff like that. But we're going to stick with 2,000 points. That means you'll have 2,000 minerals and 200 gas, as you always have 10% of your mineral count as gas for purposes of list building. Now, once you've decided the game size you're going to play, you need to figure out what faction and subfaction you're going to play. There is no random, unfortunately, for people who like to play random in the video game, but you will choose between Terran, Zerg, and Protoss, and then you will choose a subfaction for it. Like I said, this is going to be a Protoss list that we're going to start with, and I'm going to choose Dalam because I quite like the Dalam abilities on here. On this site in particular, every section, everything you're going to interact with is going to have a card button, and that will pop up this card. These should be up to date with what is in the current beta documents, so if they need to be updated, obviously reach out to the developer. You can also go on to the Archon Studios server and talk about it on there, because it's kind of a, like I said, this is community. We're all coming together to make everything as best we can. So I believe everything is up to date, and everything I've seen is up to date, so that is fantastic. Dalam, I really like the Diul ability, and I do think Mass Recall is a pretty useful once per game. This comes with an elite slot, 3 core slots, and 1 support slot, so let's look at what that means in the long run. So I'm going to talk about more about kind of the process and list building, but it would be amiss to not mention what's driving my decision-making process. In StarCraft, once you've picked your game size and your faction, you will have your minerals and gas to do things with. What you do as you list build is you have to balance those minerals, which let you buy units and upgrades, your Vespene gas, which allows you to buy the cards and their abilities, but also your supply slots, and also the supply slots in question, which let you include specific units into the list. How you make your decision is going to be kind of fluid around these 3 points, so I'll try to talk it through my decision making as we go. Like I said, I'm picking Dalam because I really like the abilities, so my first choice here is based on abilities. This does mean I won't be able to use the Pylon Warpin or the Bound by the Kala ability, but I do think that, me personally, I prefer Dalam. I don't think, and I've said this in my faction videos, I don't think any choices at the moment are strictly better than the other. This is what I'll be using for this example, and it'll probably be what I'll be using for my early games, but don't feel like you have to pick any one over the other. Now that I've selected my sub-faction, you can see down here the army roster section. This gives us 0 of 200 minerals, we haven't spent any of these, and 0 of 200 gas, we haven't spent any of these. We also have our supply slots here. We have 0 hero slots, 1 elite slot, 3 core slots, and 1 support slot. Now, I'm going to think about the units I might want in my army. Currently, I think Protoss benefits from a variety of units, so I'm going to get a little bit of everything for this first list. I know I have 3 core, 1 supply, and 1 elite, so let's fill that out now with Zealots, Adepts, Sentries, and a Stalker. You can go into here, into the Add a Unit card section, and you can here as well click the card to see everything available for that unit. Now, Artanis is just a hero, so he has everything he has, but other units like the Adept, you can click on their card and find the upgrade section to see the upgrades they have as well as all the regular stuff that comes stock with. So if you've ever forgotten what stats things have or want a refresher on it, all that is in here as well. Now, I've decided to start with units instead of tactics cards for my first decision-making point, because I know I want at least one of each unit for like a core building block. So that lets me see what kind of slots and minerals I have left once I've done that. I think I also want Artanis because he's a pretty solid piece, so we're going to add him as well. So let's grab a unit of Adepts, Artanis. I can't take the Praetor Guard because they are specific to the other subfaction, to the Kali, and so is the Pylon, so I can't add these to my list. Let's grab a Sentry unit, a Stalker unit, and a Zealot unit. Now we can look here and see our different units. You can go ahead and change the names of these if you want to put things up. I might paint my units in different squad colors, so I might say like the color of the squad here, or if you want to give your guys names, like this is Jerry and Bill are going to be the names of the sentries in this unit. You can also do that, but this is all just for fluff purposes. You can see these are the upgrades that are available to them, and clicking on them will increase your mineral cost. Artanis has no upgrades, and you can remove them by clicking here. You can also still access the card as well. Now, looking at what I've got in place, we can see I've filled out all the slots I have, but I have 1 of 0 hero slots because I've added Artanis and I don't come with a hero slot. So this is a bit of an illegal list right now. We'll need to figure out how to grab a hero supply to make this list legal again. Let's go to the tactic cards and add one. You can see here are all the cards. On each card, you have the psionic energy it gains when you use it. It's usually 1. It shows you the gas cost, and if it is unique, meaning you can only ever take one of them in your list, it will also note that on here. Underneath the name, you'll see the slots that it gives you, and you can of course always click the card to see the detailed view of that. So I'm looking for something with a hero slot. The only option in here that gives a hero slot is the power field, so we're going to have to take one of these automatically. And this does give you a pretty good ability as well, Dodge 2 letting you deal with some of those units that are very heavy in surge or critical hits. Now let's go back to the main view, and we can see that I've used 35 gas, 840 minerals, and have an elite and core slot open now. We still have 165 gas available, and Protoss love their psi energy, so we'll have to add more cards as we go. So now we come to a bit of an inflection point. We have to decide what to do from here. You can either decide what abilities and therefore tactics cards you want, or you can pick the units you want and then focus on cards that get you those slots or that support those units with various abilities. I think I want at least one more sentry unit, so I'll try to find a card that has a support slot. But at the same time, I want at least one forward deploy mechanic, because I don't have a lot of speed in the list right now, and I didn't take Kali to have the Pylon, so I'll be looking for a card that gives me something that will allow me to deploy a little bit more forward. Back in the tactics card list, both Warp Prism and Warp Gate give forward deploy. They're also both called Warp In. Warp In lets you kind of come in from a table edge that's not your opponent's table edge, while Warp Prism lets you place down a faction indicator and drop things on the ground. Now, Warp Prism is a little harder to use because you do drop the unit at the end of the phase, so you don't have those reinforcements immediately, but it is a little bit more flexible with how you can use it. You can also see that these are both some of the most expensive cards you can take. The cheapest card on the list is Gateway for 25 gas, Warp Gate is 40, and Warp Prism is 45. So while you could take both and get plenty of mobility options, that would be a lot of your Vespene gas. So for right now, I'm just going to take Warp Prism because not only do I like the flexibility of its Warp-In, but I also really like the phase ability. If I'm not going to be using Warp-In and I'm just going to be walking units on the board, having the ability to teleport 3, get some extra speed on my Zealots, or get Adepts out of dodge or something like that, that gives a lot of flexibility to this card. Now, the other thing I said is that I wanted a support slot, so the options that give support slots are Twilight Council or Observer. Both of these are unique, so you can actually cap out on support slots quite quickly, so you can never really spam sentries, but that's kind of okay because you don't really want to spam sentries. I think a list will want to have an Observer to primarily deal with burrow tech that Zergs can bring, so let's bring one of those. Now, Twilight Council does also give you that elite slot if you're looking to go a little bit more Stalker heavy, and of course the Veil of Shadows ability is really, really good for Stalkers and also anybody using the Warp Prism ability. So we can think about maybe also including this, but again, this is a 40 gas card and therefore very, very expensive. But now you can see we only have 95 remaining gas, 40 would be most of it, so let's not worry about the cards for just right now. For now, let's go back to units. You can see we've added a few extra slots up here at the top, so let's fill them out. A second Stalker is definitely not a miss. Stalkers are really quite powerful. And we have 2 core slots. So that can be 2 units of Adepts or a second unit of Zealots. You can see that Adepts are 150 minerals and Zealots are 170, so pretty similar in price, but Adepts take up 1 slot while Zealots take up 2. Now, this makes Zealots better at holding objectives, allows them to fall back from combat and charge other units. There's some push and pull here. I'm going to take 2 units of Adepts just to make sure I've got enough bodies on the board for the time being. And of course, the whole point of the thing was to get that second sentry, so let's add it in right now. Now, coming back to the main view, we can see that all of our slots are once again filled out, so it's time to figure out what to do with our remaining gas. Likely what I want is at least 1 more unit of Zealots because I need some frontline and a little bit more melee punch, but I also have to be careful to make sure I have enough Psi energy to use all these abilities that I have. Let's look at what's cheap Vespene-wise. The cheapest cards for Protoss, at least at the time of recording, are Gateway and Observer. Observer is unique and we already have it, so if we want to spam abilities, we'll probably end up with at least a few Gateways in the list. It also gives 2 core slots each, and we talked about wanting more Zealots, so that's great. Let's grab 2 of these for now, just to get the extra Psi into our list. Of course, this also gives us Quick Strikes, which is going to boost those Zealots that we get, as well as Artanis when we use him. 45 gas, you'll note, isn't enough for 2 more cards, so at this point we can only take 1 more card, or we could rearrange the cards we have. An option would be to remove Warp Prism and take Warp Gate as our forward deploy option instead, because that would be 5 points less and we would have 50 gas, giving us room for 2 Gateway cards if we want to spam Psi energy. Alternatively, you could keep the Warp Prism and just be 1 Psi less by only taking 1 more card from here. You can also decide that you don't need any forward deploy, given how fast Stalkers and Adepts can be, and you could just drop the Warp Prism entirely and focus on cheaper cards. This is where a lot of your personal decision making is going to take place, and it's way too early in the metagame for me to tell you what your list should and shouldn't look like. So I think here is where people are going to do a lot of personal choice and personal expression when making their lists, and we're going to see this change a lot over time. Personally, for right now, I'm going to take the Warp Prism and just be a little bit light on Psi. This will likely make me a bit weaker into certain enemies and situations, especially where I want to lean on those sentries and Stalker blink mechanics, but we're still learning the game, so I'm going to make my peace with not having a perfect list right off the rip. For now, let's leave the tactics and go back to the units. We grabbed some more core slots, so let's grab that other unit of Zealots that we've been wanting. That does still leave us with 2 open core slots that we can think about in a little bit. But at this point, we should probably talk about upgrades. It's great to add more units, but remember, upgrades make your units even better. And you have to consider that mineral cost at some point or another. Now, you could add all the units you want and then add upgrades in, but you will probably run out of minerals very quickly. So instead, we're going to take a break here when we're about 3/4 of the way done with our minerals, maybe a bit more, and slap in some upgrades to see where we're starting to lie in the mineral count. Like I said in the Ingalls app, you just kind of click these upgrades to apply them to the cost, and if you don't remember what an upgrade does, just pop the card open and you can read it down here in the upgrade section. Now, I want my sentries to be as good as possible at helping, so I'm initially just going to grab both upgrades for them. Solid field projectors to allow each unit to put down 2 force fields per turn if they want, and hallucination to allow them to buff nearby units with an evade roll. I'm going to do the same on my other unit of sentries down here. Now, that's a 50-point jump on what is initially a 120-point unit, so we're nearly increasing them by, I don't know, is that probably 40 to 50%-ish? Quite expensive, but it does make them very solid support units, especially hallucination, which we can note on the card, does not require psionic energy, and therefore kind of leans into our list where we are a little bit psi light. Now we're at 1,680 minerals, meaning we have just 320 remaining. I'm going to give both Zealot units leg enhancements for further positioning to make them a little bit faster. So let's do that right now. And you can see that brings us to only 280 remaining minerals. But now it's time to talk about the last aspect of list building, which is maximum supply. In a game of Starcraft, you're going to start with a certain amount of supply available to you each turn. On turn 1, this is either going to be 6 or 8 for standard, depending on the mission, or 3 or 4 for skirmish, again, depending on the mission. Standard engagement games then add 2 supply each turn, and skirmish games add 1 supply each turn. So turn 2, you will have 2 supply on top of what you started with, or 1 extra supply on top of what you started with for a skirmish game. Every game ends with the maximum amount of supply, which is 14 for standard and 7 for skirmish. My list currently, if you add everything up, has 12 supply. So even though it has decent units, I can't hit the max supply cap even if I try right now. Now, this max supply is not a cap. You can have 15, 16 supply in your list if you end up building your list that way. It'll be pretty difficult to get that high, but you will expect to lose and replace units. Let's double check and look at the Adept card. Just talk about this for a second. When you have 3 or 4 Adepts in the unit alive, it counts as 1 supply on the board. But when you go down to 2 or only 1 Adept left in the unit, that is, they've killed half the unit, it counts as 0 supply. Now that does mean that Adept unit, even if it doesn't die but it has only 2 left on the board, is not contributing to the max supply on the board anymore. So if you have 3 units of Adepts on the board, you have 3 supply. If one of them dies, or one of them even just goes down to 2 models left, you only have 2 supply on the board and can therefore bring in reinforcements. Bringing in reinforcements is a big part of the list, and having more reinforcements in your list does mean you have more things to pull from. However, we should note one important distinction. When you look at how the final score is calculated in a game of Starcraft, you have what's called a reserves penalty, number 3 here on the list. For each unit remaining in a player's reserves, their opponent gains plus 10 VP plus an additional plus 1 VP per point of that unit's current supply. So if you do go over the maximum supply in a list, you will probably lose enough units that some of them will come on the board, but if you go too heavy into this kind of like always having a massive backup of supply in the bank, you will end up punishing yourself if you can't get them all on the board by the end of the game. There's definitely a balancing act here because you can also just have lower than max supply if your list has, for instance, 11 or 12 supply, even though the max at the end of the game is 14 for a standard engagement. You won't be able to ever fully max out on the final turn of the game, but maybe that makes each individual unit a little bit stronger, and that'll give you an advantage earlier on in the game. There's going to be a lot of metagame playing here, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I know exactly how it's going to work. For now, I think shooting for the maximum supply, so 14 for standard engagement or 7 for skirmish, is probably not a bad place to start. If you find yourself at 10 or 12, if you find yourself at 14, 15, even 16, don't feel too bad about your list not being quote-unquote perfect. These are things we're all going to have to live with and learn with as the game kind of grows as a game. Again, I would just like to reiterate, I'm not telling you how to make the best list, but just how I approach list building and the thoughts that should be in your head as you're making your list. If the list I end up with is bad, then it's bad, but at least you'll know how to make a list. Now again, we are 2 under the cap, and we do have 2 open core slots, so I'm just going to grab another unit of Zealots. I think having that extra front line is not a bad thing at all. This does make us 14 supply, so we are maxed out on supply for standard engagement. It's possible for us to max out if things go really well, but it's also impossible for us to end up with unused reinforcements, so again, there's ups and downs. This does mean if we lose units early on, we might just be at a supply disadvantage in the middle or even later portions of the game. Again, we're just going to have to see as a community how that pans out and how these lists sort of evolve. Now, this does mean that I'm probably not going to buy anything else. Even if I do pick up some more tactics cards from more slots, I think I'm pretty okay on supply at this point. So this last 110 minerals is strictly for upgrades. So let's fill out the upgrades that we're going to do. I've got my new Zealots, and they're also going to get legs because the leg enhancement is very good for units that want to be in combat. I think Stalkers should get Path of Shadows to keep opponents honest if they don't take detections for hidden units and kind of punish them if they don't. So let's go ahead and grab Path of Shadows for both of our Stalker units. We can check out how much we have left and see that we have 50 minerals left. Lots of decent upgrades. We're going to look at Fury of the Nerazim because that's quite good for Stalkers, but let's spread the love out a bit and give the Adepts some upgrades. We don't really have the Psi kicking around to be using Resonating Glaives as much because, again, this does take 1 Psionic energy to use. It does make them 3 shots per Adept, which is pretty good, but we are not going to end up with a massive amount of Psionic energy in our deck. So with that in mind, let's go for the Guidance upgrade, because again, this is just a passive buff that doesn't require us to use any Psi. And Anti-Evade is going to be really good at units that get evade rolls, especially very good evade rolls like Zerg can get on Kerrigan or on Zerglings. We've grabbed Guidance on this first one. We've got 2 other units of Adepts to grab Guidance for. That gives us 20 left, so let's give 2 units of Zealots My Life for Ire to make them better at charging. Now this does mean we have 1 distinct Zealot unit, which has no life for Ire. And we'll have to find a way to make them look distinct on the table. Now personally, I'm going to get some little markings or squad colors to differentiate different units. You can use whatever you want. Some people will, I don't know, maybe paint the rims of their bases a different color, or maybe put a little token next to them so they can remember which unit is distinct from which one. But if you are going to have units with different upgrades that are the same type of unit, it should be easy to tell them apart on the tabletop. If you're a long-term miniature game player, you already know this, but there's probably going to be plenty of people playing this as one of their first miniature games, so I think it's important to call that out. And with that, we're done with minerals. We are 2,000 out of 2,000, but we do still have 45 gas left. We need to decide what to do with that. Like I said, we are quite Psi light, so we really need to be clever about using resources each turn. We only have 5 cards so far, and the Observer's double Psi doesn't actually do anything because there's nothing that we have that costs 2 Psi to use, so this is really just a 5 Psi list at the moment. I'm going to play around with the cards I have and not drop anything, but in the future if I decide I don't want Warp Prism or want to go a different route, I might change it. But for now, I need to just use my gas, and I can only get 1 other card. Now, I think what I'm going to go with is the Forge. This gives us 2 good abilities. They only affect ground units, of course, but all there are ground units at this point in the miniatures game. No flyers yet for Protoss, though that is probably going to change soon. Let's grab this. It's within our budget. That does give us 10 floating gas, but there's not really anything we can do about that for now. And there you have it. This is a legal 2,000 point list. We are within both of our mineral and gas limits. Our supply slots are either filled or underfilled. And again, I'm not going to sit here and tell you if this is a good list or a bad list. I just made it for this video and I haven't tried it yet. So I hope it gives you a good idea of how to make a legal list and how to approach thinking about your choices in the list building process. On the Ingalls app, you can now click this Print Army button, and this will print it out with all the information on it. You can see your tactics cards are here and the rules that are on them. You can see your units are down here. It has all their weapon stats and their abilities, including the upgrades that you've given them. These might be a little easier or harder to read for you depending on what you like to look at. You can also get the cards from the beta document if you would rather have printable cards to maybe put sleeve and have on the table, or if you want like specific sheets for the units, they also have those available on a unit by unit basis. Those are the ones we looked at in the faction videos. But if you just want one to print out and look at and read and maybe share with your opponent or share with friends if you're talking about lists, this is a great way to print it out and get all your information in one place. And that'll do it for this video, guys. I hope you learned at least a little bit, and I'm sure everyone still has questions. We are all still learning the game. There's still a lot to go into. I hope what I gave you is the questions you should be asking yourself and the answers you should be looking for when you're making your list, as well as just the very basics of what do minerals mean, what does gas mean, and what does supply mean, and how to incorporate all of them to make a legal and hopefully pretty decent list. I'm really looking forward to seeing what the community comes up with, how the metagame shakes out, and just what cool, interesting lists people figure out and decide to use. But that'll do it for this video. Like I said, I hope you learned at least a little bit. If you still have questions, feel free to pop them in the comments down below. I'll see you in the next video, and as always, stay cozy.